Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. There's a currency in the nation's capital that's worth more than any amount of gold, and that currency is power. Well, Donald Trump's power account continues to grow. Walk the halls of the U.S. Capitol, and you can see it in full bloom. The president-elect has some big plans for his return to Washington. More than draining the swamp this time, it's full steam ahead to fix our nation. Now even a few Democrats are agreeing with some of his choices. Bernie Sanders says he likes what he's heard from Mr. Trump's pick to run the Department of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So does John Fetterman. And then there's the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. It's emerging, headed up by Ilan and Vivek. DOGE feels a little paradoxical to me. It's kind of like the Department of Dry Water. But what's good is that many congressmen agree we need to cut enormous government spending. Listen to Democrat Ro Khanna.
It should be bipartisan to be against wasteful spending. Now, when you look at Elon Musk, he brilliantly disrupted Lockheed Martin and Boeing to help Americans launch rockets into space far cheaper and put satellites up there. So he knows how to have more competition for the five primes. And I'd like to work with him and others to see how we can introduce that competition to lower the costs for the American public in the defense budget.
Well, the question is, have things gotten so bad that enough members from both parties are willing to set aside politics and follow truth and some common sense? Well, in the meantime, other Democrats are already planning for the next election, and they're trying to figure out if they can change the way elections work so they have a better chance of winning. They want to eliminate the Electoral College, which was created by our founders to make sure each state, including people in less populated areas like farmers, had a voice in the election. So between now and the inauguration, we're going to see a Washington realignment like no other. Tracking it all is the trusted editor-in-chief for The Hill, Bob Cusack. Welcome back, Bob.
Hey, Alan. Great to be with you.
Well, there's a lot to discuss, but let's start by telling us what you've already seen about the reception Mr. Trump is getting from Congress and about this budget mess and the threats to close down the government. Feels like a broken record to me.
It is, and the spending in Washington is like basically Groundhog Day. It's been since 1996 since they've actually done the appropriations process the sane way, one at a time. So they keep saying they're going to keep going back to those good old days, and they can't get there. And honestly, this bill is not popular. It's not popular with the Trump orbit. Speaker Johnson is scrambling to see what he can do next. But this is a bit of chaos in Washington right now.
Well, let's talk a little more about the budget and the debt. $36 trillion and counting today. Musk and Vivek, the Doge twins as they're referred to now, are determined to cut $2 trillion in the first 2 years. What are they saying on the Hill about their efforts?
It's going to be very difficult. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, you mentioned the Pentagon and audits and how it's failed 7 in a row. There's a real frustration with government efficiency. So some Democrats actually like the idea. Some Democrats don't. Cutting $2 trillion is going to be extremely difficult. But at the same time, Trump does have a mandate, especially after winning the popular vote. So we'll see where it goes. But listen, anytime you try to change anything in Washington, it's going to be an uphill battle. But Elon and Vivek are ready to take it on.
Well, some Democrats seem to feel they may never get back to the White House unless they can change the Electoral College. Is that even possible? Do they have a chance?
They don't. It was interesting, Alan, down the stretch of the election, maybe some Democrats thought they were going to lose because they were complaining, including Tim Walz, the VP nominee of the Electoral College. Both parties have complained about this over the years at different times, but the Electoral College is here to stay. There have been some efforts in various states, but is it anywhere close to happening? Absolutely not.
What about Speaker Johnson? Do you think his job is in question with this debate over the budget and the continuing resolution?
Well, Alan, it's like a bad sports team, like a football team that's struggling. Everybody says, let's get rid of the coach. Okay, well, first of all, it's a very tough job for Speaker. But then you also have to decide, well, who's going to replace him? And we went through 3 weeks last year without a speaker. So, and Kevin McCarthy was ousted, and then a lot of other people tried to become a speaker until Johnson finally became speaker. So Johnson is in a bit of trouble. There is no doubt about it, because he has such a narrow majority in the new Congress. One or two people who won't vote for him, and the Democrats are certainly not going to vote for him. This could be even more chaos in the beginning of January on that speaker vote.
You know, I live a long way outside the Beltway, so I don't pretend to understand, but when I start to look at what's in that CR, it's amazing to me. I mean, there's real money that's needed for the victims of the hurricanes in the Carolinas. But then there's also money in there for a new stadium for the Commanders. You know, I'd like to expand the church. Do you think we could fund that in this CR as well? It just seems like a bizarre process to me.
It's a complete bizarre process, and it honestly doesn't make, for the greatest country in the world, how we make laws in this country is absurd. We and both sides do it, Republicans and Democrats. When they're in the majority, they want to move bills so quickly that you can't physically read them before you vote on them. And it's a terrible process. Both parties have also tried to revamp the process. Speaker Johnson committed to a 72-hour waiting period to review bills, but on some bills, including this one that looks like it's already dead, that was going to be thrown out the window. So this is something that we need some budget reform and spending reform and reading the bill reform.
Common sense. Well, let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Mr. Trump's nominees for his cabinet and beyond. More with Bob Cusack in just a moment. We're back now with the Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack. In record time, the president-elect has put up several dozen nominees for his top administration positions. One was withdrawn before it ever got to committee, and a few others have been targeted for deeper questioning, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Pete Hegseth among them. But we've also heard that the Trump team is keeping a close watch on any Republicans who don't go along with the president-elect's choices. What's at risk for those Republicans?
Well, a lot. Their jobs. When Trump wades into congressional leadership races, whether John Thune should replace Mitch McConnell as majority leader or who the speaker should be, he has some sway, but not a ton of sway, because those are popularity contests. Those are also, Alan, secret ballots. But voting on bills is not a secret ballot. So if you're not voting with Trump and he's threatening you with a primary, you've got to be very concerned, because Trump has followed through with that promise, and Trump MAGA world has gone after people who've crossed Trump, especially the people who voted to impeach him the first and second times. And they've largely been successful. So if you're not with Trump, you could lose your job, and that gets Republicans on the Hill very nervous.
We've had some technical difficulties maintaining our signal, but we're going to continue this interview. We've just moved Bob over to his telephone. Bob, your answers were so good you broke the internet.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.
I want to follow up. The first time Mr. Trump came to the White House, it felt like to me he had a lot of headwind from traditional Republicans. This time he's coming to the White House, and it seems to me he's really leading the party. Is that perspective correct?
No, absolutely. I think it is. You know, when Trump won the first time, he had a lot of resistance within the Republican Party. Now he's driving the bus, especially on the border and the wall, which was not a top priority for congressional Republicans in Trump's first term, and it frustrated Trump. Now Trump is going to be doing border and immigration stuff right out of the gate. Why? Because everyone is following him this time, not fighting him. Not everyone was fighting him the first time around, but a lot of Republicans were. There are very few of them now.
Wow. Well, let's move to TikTok. There's a bill in place that would ban TikTok if it's not sold and turned over to management that is arm's length from the Chinese government. Republicans and some Democrats, including Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey.
We're very concerned that you have China, our number one adversary, or the government of China, along or others like Iran or Russia or North Korea, controlling information into the United States of America and pushing false information out, especially to young people when, if you're under 30, this is the number one place you get your news from.
What's the feeling on the Hill about whether this ban should happen?
Well, it's interesting. It's split because you have the national security concerns, Alan. You've also got First Amendment concerns, which are clashing. And obviously the courts have been involved in this, the Supreme Court tackling it as well. So this is something that did pass Congress. I wasn't sure it was going to pass Congress. It did, but whether it actually happens remains to be seen.
All right, well, tell us what's being planned to address immigration. The stories of crime, sex trafficking, and gang takeovers are multiplying. Is there anything in the works that offers hope?
Well, yeah, as far as that, you're going to see Donald Trump, when he's inaugurated, soon thereafter, on day one, he's going to have a slew of immigration executive actions. He wants to, speaking of the courts, go after birthright citizenship. But he and his border czar, Tom Homan, want to be very aggressive at certainly deporting criminals who are in the country illegally. So that's going to be the first priority. But while immigration and border legislation is tough to pass in Congress, Trump can do a lot administratively through executive actions and through regulations or deregulations to deal with immigration. But that's going to be his top issue. I think taxes is going to be right behind it with the economy. But immigration is very, very important to Donald Trump.
I've got a further question about priorities. Mr. Trump wants to strengthen our military, given the multiple threats in the Middle East and China. Do you think he's going to get what he wants?
I think he's going to get some of what he wants, but one of the tough issues when you win a campaign is you got to govern. And one of the issues that really neither party has dealt with in recent years is the debt. So a lot of Republicans want to pass an extension of the Trump tax cuts. They want to increase defense spending. Makes sense, especially with the threats around the globe, especially China and Russia and North Korea and Iran. I mean, there's a long list. So I do think there will be a boost in defense spending. Will be as big as some of the defense hawks want? Probably not. And I do think the Republicans are going to have to get some handle on the debt and deficit. At some point, some party or both parties probably, that's the only way it's probably going to get done. They're going to have to come together and deal with the insolvency of Medicare, the insolvency of Social Security. They're both headed for bankruptcy, but $36 trillion of debt, that's a lot of debt.
That would be a courageous leadership we haven't seen in Washington, D.C. in a long time. Can you give us an idea just of what a first step or two might look like so we'll recognize it when we see it?
Well, certainly cutting government and cutting government jobs is going to be a first step. Now, budget-wise, that's not going to add up to a lot when you're talking about $36 trillion of the nation's debt. That said, I do think that you can make cuts to the executive branch that can be meaningful. But when you're talking long-term, Alan, you've got to deal with the big spenders. And what are the big spenders? Medicare, which is very popular. Social Security, very popular. Defense spending, very popular. But you're going to have to reform those programs and make them more efficient. Now, a lot of times you can get out of debt by growing, but I think it's going to have to be a combination of growth and reforms passed by Congress, a courageous Congress that we have not seen in many years.
Well, I pray they find the courage to do the right thing for all of us. Bob Cusack, I hope you get to have some family time over Christmas week, and I want to thank you for carving out the time with us today.
Thanks, Alan. Happy holidays. Have a great Christmas.
Well, Merry Christmas to you. And in a moment, I'll have a few thoughts from a biblical perspective to help us process all this change. And later, your emails reacting to the show. Stay with us. Whenever we have a conversation with those people who live and work in Washington, D.C., we get a very consistent message that D.C. is a very difficult environment in which to introduce change. They resist it, they fight it, they'll do anything in their power to maintain the status quo. And as much as I want to get agitated about those political politicians that have been there for decades, the reality, I live in church world, we don't like change. We want to sit in the same seat, park in the same spot, read the same translation, maintain the same routine in our worship calendar. We don't want anything to change. So I think before we can imagine there's going to be significant sweeping change and reform in those that are providing leadership to our nation, we're going to have the imagination that we can be individuals who can process change. We've got to be different. I know that's not comfortable. We'd rather point our fingers at somebody else and say, you be different. But I believe with all of my heart, God is looking at His people, His covenant people, the people of faith, the Christ followers right now in this season, on the heels of this election, and asking us if we're willing to be different. It's Christmas time. Christmas is about change. The incarnation, God sent His Son. He said when the time was just right, God sent His Son to reconcile all humanity to Himself, to take down the dividing wall between Jew and Gentile, all the things that have separated us, all the boundaries that we put in place, all of the places where we've established pride and certainty that we were better than someone else. Now we stand under the lordship of Jesus. So as we walk towards this Christmas, I want to invite you to begin to quietly say to the Lord, I'm willing to be different. What places in my life would you like to initiate change? What habits can I lay aside? What habits can I put in place? What change will you bring to me? If we'll do that, I believe with all of my heart, we'll see changes on a national level that will bring a better future for our children and our grandchildren. And with that, there's more reasons for hope than despair. Well, I'll be back with your emails in just a moment. Stay with us. Thank you for taking the time to send us your emails, your thoughts and perspectives. They're important to us. Diane from Massachusetts. I work as a school psychologist. We have LGBTQ plus month and after-school groups, as well as many of the offensive books you've seen in libraries across the country. I've tried to start an after-school without school funding group for Christians and have been shot down in my efforts. I've been told that all groups must be thoroughly inclusive and cannot teach any Bible readings or Christian principles. Please have your readers pray for me as I'm still trying, as I feel their civil rights are being violated, and there are many students interested in such a gathering. Thank you again for all you do, Pastor Jackson. Well, Diane, I want to thank you for your efforts. I believe it's an absolute necessity that we take our faith back to school. We've been quiet and polite and withdrawn from the public arena when one person raised their hands and said they didn't agree. And yet we see in almost every place we look a worldview, an agenda being pushed by corporate America, by government America, by academic America. We've got to take our faith back. So Diane, you keep up with your efforts. I believe we will see a change coming. God is moving in the earth, and I believe if we'll have the courage to stand up for our biblical worldview and share those principles, we don't have to be angry or belligerent. We certainly don't need to be violent, but we're going to have to be determined and persevere. God will meet us. Jeffrey in Arlington, Texas, he said, how do you get out of debt? I'm concerned that this is causing separation in my marriage. What does the Bible say, and what is your opinion? Well, too much debt will bring separation in almost any relationship. Your marriage isn't unique. None of us can withstand that. The Bible tells us that the borrower is servant to the lender, and it encourages us to minimize our exposure to debt. That takes a commitment, a plan. It's not just an accident. I live in Nashville. This is Dave Ramsey country. If you don't have a better beginning point than that, ask Rabbi Google. Dave Ramsey will give you the baby steps to walk out from under debt. It makes a lot of difference. And then Marilyn in Nebraska said, I want to thank you for your program and the bold stands you've taken for God's truth. I pray that all your ministry and your team's efforts will be protected, strengthened, and multiplied in the days ahead. God give you all a peaceful Christmas and a 2025. You're helping me know God better, and I'm grateful. Merry Christmas. Well, Marilyn, thank you. This wonderful time of the year, we get to celebrate the entry of God into time. We're reminded that God intends to write a better story for us. One of my favorite promises in Scripture is that He says He's the author and the completer of our story. He has that license that an author has to keep rewriting the ending until he gets it just right. I believe He'll do it for me, and I believe He'll do it for any one of you. It's Christmas time. We've all got something to celebrate. Well, if you haven't yet, take a moment to send your email to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do so much to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.